gets the giggles. Mr. Silly lives in a place called Nonsense Land, where the grass is blue and the trees are red, which you already know. It is also a place where zebra crossings are spotty, which you probably did not know. In Nonsense Land, you post letter and telephone boxes, and you make phone calls from letter boxes. And in Nonsense Land, the umbrella all have holes in them, so that you know when it has stopped raining, which is utter nonsense. But not if your name is Mr. Silly. Now, one morning last week, Mr. Silly got up, put on his hat, brushed his teeth with soap, as usual, polished his shoes with toothpaste, as usual, and went down for breakfast. For breakfast, Mr. Silly had fried eggs and custard, as usual, and a cup of hot milky marmalade, as usual. After breakfast, he went out into his garden. The day before, Mr. Silly had brought a tree, but as he looked at the tree, he realized that he did not have a hole to plant it in. So he went to the hardware shop. "Good morning," said Mr. Silly. "I would like to buy a hole." "Sorry," said the sales assistant. "We're all out of holes. Sold the last one yesterday." "Bother," said Mr. Silly. He decided there was nothing for it but to go and search for a hole. He walked and he walked and he walked. Eventually, Mr. Silly stopped walking and looked down at his feet. "That's odd," he said. "This grass is green." "Of course it is," said a voice behind him. "Grass is always green." "Who are you?" asked Mr. Silly. "Little Miss Wise." "I'm Mr. Silly. Could you tell me where I am?" "You're in Sensible Land," said Miss Wise. Mr. Silly had walked so far that he had walked right out of Nonsense Land. "I'm looking for a hardware shop," said Mr. Silly. "Can you help?" "Certainly," said Miss Wise. "Follow me." As they walked along, Mr. Silly looked above him. He had never seen anywhere like it. The grass was green, the trees were green, even the hedges were green. They came to a zebra crossing, a stripy zebra crossing. Mr. Silly chuckled, and then he giggled, and then he laughed out loud. "Why are you laughing?" asked Miss Wise. "The zebra crossing, ha-ha, a stripy," laughed Mr. Silly. "What else would a zebra crossing be?" said Miss Wise. "Spotty, of course," said Mr. Silly, wiping the tears from his eyes. "How silly," said Miss Wise. They set off again, and the further they went, the more Mr. Silly laughed. He laughed when he saw someone posting a letter in a letterbox. He laughed when he saw someone using a phone in a telephone box. And he laughed when he saw an umbrella with a hole in it. Eventually, they came to Miss Boat's hardware shop. Good afternoon, said Mr. Silly. I would like to buy a hoe. A hoe? Questioned Miss Bolt. Yes, big enough to plant a tree in, explained Mr. Silly. Miss Bolt snickers. Miss Wise trotted, and they burst out laughing. I never heard anything so absurd, laughed Miss Bolt. But I do have something that may help, though. That evening, Mr. Silly invites his friend Mr. Nonsense for supper and told him all about his day in Sensible Land. Mr. Nonsense laughed so hard he fell off his chair. And then, continued Mr. Silly, Miss Bolt, give me a spade. A spade? Why in the world would I want to buy a spade when all I wanted was a hoe? He, that's, ridiculous, laughed Mr. Nonsense. What's for pudding? Spam roly-poly, answered Mr. Silly. Oh, goody, said Mr. Nonsense. My favorite. The end.